Good afternoon. I'm Roy Priest, the chair of the Budget Finance and Audit Committee, HOC, and I'd like to welcome you to this session. Um, I am joined in this meeting by Commissioner Jeffrey Merkowitz, who's also our vice chair of our board as well. And we will proceed with the order of business. And the first item of business is the adoption of the minutes from our November the 6th meeting. Can I get a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved.
Seconded. Probably moved in second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. So ordered. We have a rather ambitious agenda today, both in terms of number and subject matter content. So for discussion, we also are going to have another committee meeting following this one. So I hope those of you who are online who may be anticipating a meeting starting at 2:00, if this meeting runs a little longer, just hold on, we'll be there. So I'll go ahead and proceed with the agenda for this meeting. And the first item of discussion is our fiscal year 2025 fourth quarter audited financial statements. And I'll turn to our president, Chelsea Andrews.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, the HOC team, and the public. The first item before you today is our standard quarterly report in regards to our unaudited financial position and statements. I will just make a couple of comments before I turn it over to our CFO and his team, which ultimately reflect the fact that the agency's financial position is positive. You will see in the materials provided that our net position has increased since last year. Our quick and current ratios are stable and strong. Our net income in our position has increased in compared to last year for the same period where we had a loss. Revenues also increased. However, we do continue to have challenges related to bad debt and vacancy loss. We will talk more about those challenges as we get further in the agenda related to our budget to actuals. But ultimately, the agency's financial position is strong. We've had very little change related to our administrative expenses, but I do want to highlight and note the great work that our maintenance team is doing in terms of trying to ensure that we're addressing expenses. Both maintenance expenses and utilities have declined. So I will turn it over to our CFO, Tim Getzinger, for some initial comments before he turns it over to our controller, Eugenia Pasquale, for further detail.
Thank you, President Andrews, committee members, and the viewing public. For the record, Tim Getzinger, Senior VP of Finance and CFO. Today, the finance team will be presenting on 5 items, including unaudited financials, budget to actuals. There will be 2 budget amendments, 1 calendar year and 1 fiscal year, as well as the tenant write-offs. And before we dive into the packets, a quick look at the macro environment and the agency's position from a macroeconomic perspective. And you've probably read that recently the Fed cut rates by 25 bips. This will be the 3rd time in the last 4 months that they did this. Once it was in September, 50 bips, and then again in November, 25 bips. There's a little bit of surprise of this December's 25 because the November cut was not necessarily one that was specifically planned. They were always eyeing December, but they moved up November's, and so there was some uncertainty whether or not they would do this December cut. But in doing so, they have kind of said that there will be less in the future. So I think we're looking at maybe 2 in calendar year 25. And so what does that mean to the agency? It's going to be favorable for borrowing for development projects, as well as for our home ownership initiatives, because the interest rates will be a little bit down. The opposite will be true for investment yield, as well as our ability to generate interest income, specifically in those IBDDAs, those interest-bearing deposit accounts that we have. In terms of the agency's FY25 Q1 financial position, our financial health remains stable, although the agency ended the quarter with a slight reduction of 0.3% quarter over quarter in total assets and hit $2.18 billion Our net position did improve over the same period by 2.43% or 7.2 million to $303 million. This is the agency's highest level in 2.5 years. And we posted a net income of 7.2 million, which again is our highest in 2 years. And the net adjusted income of a little over 600,000 compared to last quarter's net loss of 4.5 million. So that also compared favorably. As the president mentioned, current and quick ratios are, although they're slightly down from the beginning of the fiscal year, they are healthy and they are at 3.18 and 2.65 respectively. HAP utilization is stable and strong at 96.3%. Tenant arrearages continue to be an issue amounting to 1.6 million for the quarter, which is indicative of the environment of lease enforcement that the agency is in. Reserves, including the general fund operating and property reserves, are stable. Review of our 9 revolving development funds also demonstrates stability and are projected to improve over the next few quarters, given the upcoming commitment and development fees. We will speak in the budget to actuals. The slippage in the commitment development fees is normal. And the timing and the amount of commitment and development fees are subject to the changes in the financial market and project costs, which create both timing and value variances from time to time throughout the year. Although post-COVID renormalization of operations is underway, it's taking longer than anticipated as the court system continues to be a hurdle in the repossessing and repositioning of our inventory. Lease enforcement actions and rent collection issues have driven variances. Of the 2.21 million FY25 Q1 property budget variance, there are 12 properties with the highest variances, and these represent 2.15 million or 97% of the total variance. When we map that against the tenant receivable balance, which is a key indicator of whether a tenant in a property is paying, the results continue to indicate that scattered sites, particularly the VPC 1, 2, scattered site 1, and state rental combined and Cider Mill are driving the major variances, which is why the agency continues to focus on its efforts in these properties. That said, there are several positive signs, such as a reduction in quarter-over-quarter maintenance costs, utility costs being at a 6-quarter low, property budget variance being at a 4-quarter low, the turnaround at the RAD 6 properties, which will be discussed in the budget to actuals, as well as the aforementioned improvements in net income, all of which lend faith that these efforts are beginning to yield results. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, we can advance to the first packet item.
You have any questions?
Like I said, just, in the past, we've talked about how long we think it's going to take to kind of clear out the system. And if we're still on track for, at this point, I don't know if it's like 1 more quarter, 2 more quarters.
I don't want to steal the thunder.
Right.
That is something that.
Right. I think with Tim's overview, he gave an overview both of the financial position as well as budget to actuals. When we get to that second packet, we have Ali Ozair, our VP of Property Management, which will be joining us virtually, who will provide some additional data that will help provide context in regards to our lease enforcement efforts, some forecasting that he as well as the legal team have been able to do. So that will be a part of this second presentation.
It is interesting to me whenever you talk about things either as percentages or as real dollars. Percentages are like, only 0.2%. But then you look at the amount of money because of the size of our structure financially, that's a significant amount of money. But I'm looking forward to hearing how we're going to begin to address the issues where we're getting the most leakage from our financial revenues.
Okay. With that, presenting the first agenda item is Eugenia Pascal, our controller. Eugenia.
Thank you, Tim. Good afternoon, commissioners, HOC staff, and viewing public. For the record, my name is Eugenia Pascal, controller. If you can turn to page 8, combined statements of net position. As of the quarter ended September 30, 2024, the Commission's total assets, including the deferred outflows, amounted to 2.18 billion, a decrease of about 7 million or 30.31% from 2.19 billion recorded in fiscal year ending June 30, 2024. Excluding the deferred outflows of resources, the decrease in total assets will be 6.1 million. On the other side of the balance sheet, the total assets decreased from the previous 1.83 billion in June 2024 to 1.81 billion as of September 2024, a decrease of 17 million. This is partially offset by an increase in the net position of 7 million from 296 million to 303 million, and an increase in deferred inflows of 3 million to 68.3 million for a net change of 7 million. The liquidity ratios, although slightly lower than last year, it's still indicative of a stable financial health. The current ratio was 3.18 in September compared to 3.46 in June, whereas the quick ratio was 2.65 in September and 2.98 in June. The 7 million decrease in total assets, including the deferred outflows, is largely due to a decrease in both the restricted and unrestricted cash and cash equivalents, which are mainly driven by the bond redemptions, which are scheduled January 1st and July 1st every year, which repays the bondholders the bond principal and accrued interest. Additional draws from the HOC headquarters bond proceeds to pay for construction costs, which reduces the funds until they are fully drawn. Single-family mortgage-backed securities purchases. Also, annual payment of liability and property insurance, renewal of license and maintenance fees for Yardi SaaS private cloud system, which is the core enterprise system for financial property management and customer-related information. Also, the rental license fees and solid waste tax. A one-time FY24 retroactive wage adjustment, which was processed in September this year, and retirement contribution to employment retirement system for unfunded actuarial liabilities. Also contributing is the timing of advances to several component units, and this decrease are partly offset by incoming cash flows from the commitment fees and development fees from the Hillendale transactions, the state grant for the Metropolitan Green Roof Project, and reimbursements for interest and pre-development expenses from Garnkirk. Also offsetting the decrease is an increase in mortgage and construction loan receivables related to PNC relock draws for Westside Shady Grove Building B, Wheeler Manor, Wheaton Gateway, as well as the Housing Production Fund draws for Hillendale Gateway. Also contributing is an increase in prepaid insurance, negative arbitrage, county-made grant receivables, rent subsidies receivables, and properties prepaid taxes. And lastly, an increase in advances to component units due to the timing of payment and reimbursements of expenses, mainly at Elizabeth House, the South County Recreational, and Aquatic Center, Willow Manor, Wheaton Gateway, as well as operating expenses at Forest Oak and Arcola Towers. The decrease in total liabilities is largely due to the decrease in bonds payable due to the scheduled bond redemptions in both multifamily and single-family fund, as well as a decrease in accrued bond interest payable. The decrease in the deferred inflows of resources for derivative instruments is mainly due to the fair value changes in the Hillendale interest rate swaps. Page 9, please, for combined statements of revenue and expenses. The commission, do you have any question before I proceed? No. The commission has a net income of about 7.2 million in the first quarter of fiscal year 25 compared to a net loss of 10.9 million in the quarter of FY 24, excluding the unrealized gain on investments of 6.6 million in fiscal year 25 and unrealized losses on investments of 6.4 million in FY 24. HOC ended with an adjusted net income of about 605,000 in fiscal year 25 as compared to a net loss of 4.5 million in FY 24. This is attributed primarily to an increase in investment income and interest income on mortgage and construction loans receivables within the multifamily fund, the state grant for the Metropolitan, County Main Grant and Capital Improvement Program, as well as non-operating interest and investment income. This favorable variance is partly offset by an increase in the fringe benefits and interest expense. The increase in the HAP revenue and the increase in the HAP expenses are almost fully offsetting each other and has insignificant overall impact. The operating revenue increased by 19 million to 88 million in the first quarter of fiscal year 25 compared to 69 million for the same period last year. This is largely driven by the changes in the unrealized gains and losses on investments, as well as higher HAP revenue and investment income. Excluding the unrealized gains and losses on investments and HAP revenue, the commission ended with an adjusted operating revenue of 45 million in fiscal year 25 compared to 42 million in fiscal year 24, or an increase of 3 million. The investment income is the major contributor, accounting for 2 million of the increase. The operating expenses also increased from 81 million in fiscal year 24 to 86 million in fiscal year 25, a 5 million increase attributed primarily to the increase in HAP expense, fringe benefits, and interest expense. If we exclude the HAP expenses, the adjusted operating expenses increased only by 2 million. The non-operating net revenue amounted to 5 million in fiscal year 25, up by 4 million from the previous year. An increase in investment income, interest income on mortgages, and other grants, partially offset by an increase in interest expense, accounted for the non-operating revenues favorable variance. We provided more detailed information in the notes to financial statements, starting on page 13. This concludes our financial statements presentations. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank you for having had the opportunity to see these notes before the meeting. It certainly makes it easier to follow and track what is going on in these financial presentations because there are a lot of numbers moving, and so it helps to explain it. So I want to thank you for that. Very helpful. I'm a little interested in knowing about the increases in fringe benefits. We haven't expanded our fringe benefit packages. I mean, is it the cost of the where's the cost increases coming from our fringe benefit package?
So the increase in the fringes, because we did have the wage adjustments, and like the FICA and other benefits are a factor of these salaries. So same thing happened with the fringes; they went up.
Okay, I understand that. Is there any other question? You have a question? No, I don't have any other questions either.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's a presentation does not require any action on the part of the committee. And so I'll move to the next item on our agenda, which is the, fiscal year 25 first quarter budget to actual statements.
Thank you. Commissioners, as you will see in the materials that you've received, we took the time to make sure that there was even more narrative around our efforts as it pertains to lease enforcement. And in fact, there's quite a bit of information starting on page 41 under the Opportunity Housing Fund. But generally speaking, we are tracking in the right direction. We are taking very aggressive steps to address the backlog of bad debt and to quickly turn our units. I want to allow, before we turn it over to our finance colleagues, our property management Vice President Ali Rozier, an opportunity to share more insight in regards to the efforts that are underway, as well as to share insights related to the portfolio where we've identified three key areas, really scattered sites in Cider Mill that we have been focused on. And so Ali is joining us virtually, and I turn it over to you, Ali.
Thank you, President Andrews. Good afternoon, commissioners. Regarding lease enforcement has been rigorously implemented since the beginning of the year. And we have identified 3 properties. One of them is our scattered site portfolio, which have been a focal point for all of us when we discuss property performance, including lease enforcement. So regarding Cider Mill, we have so far gained possession of 24 units through lease enforcement. We have another 60 residents who are in the court system due to lease enforcements related to non-payment of rent. There are another 92 residents who are earmarked to go into lease enforcement. We just have to approach these batch at a time. For the scatter sites, we have actually gained possession of 130 units through lease enforcement. We have another 94 tenants who are currently in lease enforcement, another approximately 250 who are earmarked to go into lease enforcement in the coming months. The RAT6 portfolio has been an item of discussion for quite a period of time where we had some challenges. However, we have seen quite a bit of improvement there as well in the recent months. And we have actually gained possession of 3 units through lease enforcements. We currently have 19 writs in hand, so we're just pending for the sheriff to schedule those evictions so we can take possession of our units. And they also have another 20 units that are going to be going into lease enforcement in the coming weeks and months. So as a whole, the Cider Mill property, we're expecting to take lease enforcement action for non-paying tenants for 20% of the tenants. For the scatter site portfolio, that's going to be nearly a third of the portfolio against whom we'll be needing to take lease enforcement action for non-payment of rent. And for the RAT6 portfolio, it's about a quarter of the property, about 25% of all residents. We're going to need to take lease enforcement action. And in terms of expecting stabilization and when we can expect to come out on the other end for this lease enforcement, for Cider Mill, first of all, the case management process, it's really property specific. So it really depends on how big of an issue a property had in terms of tenants not paying their rent. So some properties have a smaller population, some have a much larger population. So some properties are going to start reaching stabilization come Q1 of fiscal year 26. Other may take a few more months. However, for Cider Mill, we expect to reach stabilization. And what stabilization is referring to is having completed lease enforcement action against the population of tenants we have identified as requiring lease enforcement for non-payment of rents. That would be anybody who owes us at least $2,000 in past due rents. So for Cider Mill, we're expecting that in September. For the scatter site portfolio, which is a much larger portfolio, we're expecting that in December of next year. And for the RAT6 portfolio, this is going to be by the end of the current fiscal year, June, July, we will be reaching stabilization in terms of lease enforcement. The timeline, and part of the reason why this is getting a little bit more extended, the timeline for resolution currently is anywhere from 6 to 9 months to progress a case from initially filing it in the court system to getting possession of a unit. There are also some extenuating circumstances for some of the units, approximately 10% of the units, where a tenant may appeal or the sheriff may not respond to the writ timely, and we end up actually having to refile the case. So about 10% of our units where we are doing lease enforcement, they actually get drawn out a lot longer than the 6 to 9 months we are usually seeing as the timeline. We're making progress. Lease enforcement has been in full swing, and we expect to continue to see improvement in the coming months and start seeing stabilization in the coming quarters. I'm happy to answer any questions.
No questions.
I was trying to understand, in the packet, it talks about sort of some of the unintended consequences in terms of tenants who were partially paying, but then stopped paying altogether, and sort of what the implications of that were in terms of, our collections and the enforcement.
Yes. So, part of the reason why the bad debt has been higher than where we anticipated it to be is bad debt is projected forward in the budgets based on the residents who were paying and how much they were paying at the time we did the budgets. So we had quite a few residents who may have partially been paying the rent. So let's just say your rent is $1,000, you're paying $500, but you're only out of the $1,000 you're supposed to be paying. So over a period of time, you've accumulated enough of a balance for you to be taken to for us to initiate lease enforcement action. And when that's happening, a lot of these residents are choosing to basically stop paying even the partial payment that they may have been making towards rent because they can see that we are taking a lease enforcement, and we're gonna force them to give possession back to us for their unit. So instead of continuing to pay partial rent, they're basically just choosing to, hey, I'm not paying anything. You take me to court, and whenever the court decides, I will move out. So that's contributing partly to the higher bad debt.
And we are moving forward with regards to collections. So, and we've seen some really great success across the portfolio. Cider Mill is one of the properties where tenant collection has been positive, and we've stood this up as well for scattered sites. And so tenant collection is definitely the next step when someone chooses not to pay their rent. We are pursuing collections subsequently.
And just to note, as you do in the packet, and we've said before that, by the time we're getting to lease enforcement with these tenants, we have been really working with them to try to get them resources that they need and find ways to keep them.
And in fact, the double side of the sword is that for many residents, if they received any type of support, there are certain programs that had prohibitions in regards to how long you have to wait before you even pursue lease enforcement. So if you received a resource and let's say it gave you 6 months, we then had to wait another 6 months before we could pursue any lease enforcement. And then you get started with lease enforcement, and it may take 6 to 9 months. And that doesn't include the notice period before you even go to court. So we have found that this is definitely a long road in terms of turning around the portfolio where we've had those challenges.
And sort of to put a finer point on it, the fact that we are working so hard to keep tenants in place and find ways to help them is probably has extended our time in the red here.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. So if we had chosen to be more hard-nosed, but that's not our mission.
Yes.
So, right.
Another part of this is that, part of this is getting possession, and then you've got to turn the unit and you got to release it. What are we looking at in terms of time frame? Because during that period of time, again, we are not getting revenue. So what are we looking at in terms of from the time they gain possession to we have reoccupancy of that unit?
So typically the expectation is for all of our multifamily portfolio, once we have gained possession of the unit, to get it ready for occupancy within 7 to 10 business days. Unfortunately, that turn times are not as you would normally expect, 7 to 10 days, because oftentimes, as you're probably aware, we gain possession of a unit through lease enforcement action. People do not leave these conditions necessarily in very good conditions. So it can take, in certain cases, extended periods of time to make these units ready for occupancy again. And which obviously also impacts our maintenance expenses because we have to now trash out a full unit and do a lot of repairs in some cases. So typically we're expecting anywhere from 7 to 10 days if the unit was left to us in good condition. However, many of these are not. So that does prolong the time it takes us to make a unit ready. In some cases, it could be weeks. And once the unit is ready, each of the property managers and the property management teams are working hard to make sure that they're leasing these units up as quickly as possible. So we are very focused on making sure that not only we're taking lease enforcement action, but on the other end, once we're getting units back, we lease them up as quickly as possible.
Once we start this process of lease enforcement, and we know that we are, in many cases, getting units back in really bad condition. Are we doing anything at all with those residents during this period of time, or while we are doing lease enforcement to deal with the issue about condition?
Yeah, so, we do try. However, when, a resident is aware that there's active lease enforcement, they're very, it's very difficult to get them to communicate or really adhere to any kind of a policy that unless they are really willing to do it. For example, in the scatter site part of we have we sometimes struggle with recertifications because once you take lease enforcement action, we very quickly find out that that person is no longer willing to collaborate with you on anything else, including, providing any documentation they may need to provide or making sure that they're they're taking proper care of their home. And as much as we try to communicate with them, unfortunately, when they're in lease enforcement, it's really up to the tenant and they don't necessarily always want to adhere to our policies and requirements.
Yeah, I know. I mean, this is a perpetual problem that everybody who has property that they manage and operate experience it. Just not unique to HOC. Even private owners can have the same issues they're dealing with. This is really a problem. I mean, in terms of the length of time that it takes from you starting this process to when you actually get possession. And I don't know how we address and remedy that, but that's an area where at some point in time, I would love to have some further conversation about maybe some creativity that we could exhibit within the framework of what we could do legally to begin to address this situation. Because it's not just, again, and maybe it's not just an internal condition for us to talk about, but with other property owners who are experiencing the same thing. I mean, many of the people who are our participants in our housing choice voucher program have multiple units, and many of them are confronting some of the same problems. But I just such an area that I have always a lot of concern about. We address this, and it's gotten worse in terms of the length of time it takes to get through the system to get possession. Yeah, it's not our problem, but in a different way. I have no other questions.
It's that balance of landlord and tenant rights and tenant protections. So.
Thank you. We will turn it over to our budget officer. We wanted an opportunity really to focus in there and make sure that we were clear that we were taking pretty aggressive actions and also give some context in regards to timeline. I'd like to turn it over to Terry Fowler, our budget officer, to provide the overall update in regards to our Q1. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. As I mentioned, we've had improvements in some of our areas of operation, and some of the variance we're experiencing primarily in the general fund is through the fees. So when we look at the overall, we did end the quarter with a negative variance of about $2.4 million. And that is in comparison to the shortfall that we had projected. So looking at that in the general fund, that is the overhead of the agency. Your general fund is always going to operate at a deficit. Being an agency such as we are, we do have a cost allocation model, but we are limited primarily on our grants and sometimes in our properties of how much of our overhead can be allocated. So the model will say what everybody's fair share is, but there are limits on some of our programs. And that's where our unrestricted cash comes in from our properties and our fee income. And for fee income, we have three primary sources: our loan management fees, and that is a stable source of income that is consistently received year over year. And then we have our commitment and development fees that when we do the budget, it's based on what the development budget is at that point in time. And as you see on the commission, that projects change over a period of time. It could be changes in cost of the project, changes in cost of debt, and other factors, and then just the completion of the project. So the good news is that although we are short in development fees in the first quarter, the receipt of that shortfall is anticipated by the end of the third quarter or close to March. And many of the projects have come to completion, and we're just waiting for final documents in order to get the next tranche of development fees. So for that variance, we do see positive light coming. But again, we are depending on a significant amount of commitment and development fees for the remainder of the year, and those too will be subject to changes. Maybe some of that will be positive with the change in the Fed rates. Perhaps we'll get a better rate and it will improve, but all of that fluctuates with the market, the timing of development, and other things you face when you're doing redevelopment and construction. Our expenses in the general fund are under budget. We do have savings in salary lapse and benefits, as well as our maintenance contracts specifically related to our IT division. And for the capital that is being funded by our operating budget, we have some savings there. Now, some of that will just be timing as the projects will be completed later in the year. So if we can look at the chart on page 10. Thank you. So as we said, the general fund, it's anticipated it has a deficit because the income shortfall is greater than the savings and expenses. We have a negative variance. For both of our bond funds, we fund the administrative costs from a draw from the bonds, and both of those have experienced savings for the first quarter that you can see there. For the opportunity housing, we have really delved into that at a great level of detail. I just will remind you that the key factors affecting it are our lease enforcement, that it's affecting both bad debt and vacancy loss, but we are seeing improvements. As Mr. Getzinger mentioned, the RAD6 is a portfolio that we have been monitoring closely, and they were within $5,000 of their budgeted projections, and in fact have seen a reduction of bad debt through the quarter. We have seen similar effects on bad debt at Cider Mill, where they have had a reduction in their receivable balance. So the effects of lease enforcement are working in the way we want them to work. It's just the timing and the magnitude of receivables that we are trying to build our way out of. But we are containing our maintenance and our utility costs from the measures that have been put in place there to ensure that we're being billed correctly for utilities and ensure that if there are leaks or other things that are increasing, specifically water usage, that we are handling those to keep control of our utility cost. If we move on to the public fund on page 14 of the packet, I'm sorry, 13 of the packet, the voucher program for the quarter operated at a shortfall. That was primarily because the HAP payments exceeded the revenue received. And that just means that we are drawing upon the reserves, which are revenues received in prior periods that hadn't been spent. So that shortfall of just over $700,000 has a source in our reserves. And we have an administrative surplus that is the result of higher proration on our admin fees, as well as fees received for additional programs. And we do have savings in the administrative cost of the program due to primarily staff turnover. That is the summation of our operating performance. If there are no questions, I'll move briefly to capital.
I have one question on the matter dealing with we are spending more in payments out on the HAP payments than we are getting revenues in from
So the
HUD.
way HUD works is they look at how much reserve you have on hand.
Yes.
So if you have enough reserve to cover your expenditures, they hold back what you're due. So it's not that we are spending above our resources, but they're not putting new money to that because they do an evaluation of how much you have in reserves and they look at how much you need to make the payments for that particular month.
Yeah.
So we're not spending beyond what we've been allotted, but we haven't received new revenue because we have unspent funds already.
And HUD knows that.
Yeah, and they calculate that and they
Yeah.
look at what you need.
Yeah.
But we still have the ability to draw on those funds if our utilization increases.
Yeah, because we have had in the past where we've operated 110% of the fair market rents in the housing choice voucher program. So I mean, that's more outlay of money going
Right.
to the landlord because we're paying at a higher rate.
Right.
And so HUD sees that in our plan. They know that we're doing that.
Right.
And so they're looking at that. So they can also know that there may be a situation where they're going to have to make adjustments or we come back in and make for additional requests. And again, they're
Right.
balancing out our reserves against our demand. So you understand.
And they also do a re-benchmarking based on what your average cost per unit
Yeah.
is. So as it always seems counterintuitive that you think you're spending and you don't have it, but if you have to spend it in order to receive it. We have an allotment of units. We have the allowable rents we can go up to, and as our expenditures increase, HUD looks at that to increase the funding afforded.
Yeah. And what's been interesting is over time, notwithstanding what political party may be in office at the time, that the administration of the Housing Choice Voucher Program has been fairly consistent in the way that they were looked at and in terms of reserves and measures what you could do. So the policies haven't changed a lot. And that's a knock on wood.
Right, because we're there right now wondering
Yeah.
what the new year is going to look
Right.
like.
Yeah.
And just
And those reserves serve us in if there is a lapse in funding, right? So
well, I was just going to mention that regarding the possibility of a government shutdown, our groups have indicated that HAP funds will still be available for at least the next couple of months in case there is a shutdown. We also have other reserves and we have some other funds that we could possibly draw down from should the need arise.
I don't have any other questions, but just a comment that really looking forward to those development fees eventually coming in.
Yes.
So
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, as it relates to capital, as you know, we monitor the expenditures year to date against the total capital budget. And we do have a few properties that have exceeded their capital budget due to unanticipated work such as boiler replacements, replacements of air conditioning units. And so for those properties that are showing the overages, there are sufficient funds to cover the overages. And we'll continue to monitor this through the year to determine if there are adjustments needed or where we may need to draw upon the Opportunity Housing Reserve Fund for properties that may not have sufficient reserves.
moved.
Properly moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. So moved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is third item, which is dealing with the budget adjustment for Forest Oak Towers.
Yes, thank you, commissioners. This matter, as well as the matter that will follow it, directly relates to Forest Oak Towers. As a reminder, the commission provided approval for us to take full ownership of Forest Oak back in September 2024. And the steps that we are advancing are to ensure that we properly align this particular asset as it pertains to establishing a budget and putting it on the appropriate calendar / fiscal year. I will turn it over to Terry Fowler to provide more details.
Thank you, President Andrews. Yes, as was mentioned, Forest Oak Towers on September 30th, we received final approval from the limited partner to assign its ownership to HOC. As such, it was removed from our calendar year budget and it becomes part of our opportunity housing properties, but it will continue to operate with the income restrictions based on the covenants. So we are removing the budget for the property for the period of October 1st through December 31st from our calendar year budget. And the impact of that is a decrease of approximately $766,000 in income, and expenses will be reduced by approximately $656,000. Net reduction of $109,000 in cash flow, and the capital budget will be decreased by $23,000. And as was mentioned, we have a second package that will incorporate a budget for the property to operate in our fiscal year opportunity housing portfolio until the end of fiscal 25. If you have any questions related to this calendar year amendment, I'd be happy to address them.
Any questions? I don't have any. I mean, we anticipated we'd see this when we approved the action to take over Forest Oak. Accept that. Can I get a motion to recommend this forward to the full commission for approval?
So moved.
Properly moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed is nay. So ordered. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Terry, please proceed with the next item.
The next item is dealing with the second quarter budget amendment.
And so for this second quarter fiscal budget amendment, we are establishing a budget for the period of October 1st through June 30 of 2025. A couple of things that are important to note now, as the property operates under opportunity housing, there's no restriction on the cash flow. And in addition, we can allocate our overhead to the property. So for the property itself, the income is approximately $2.3 million and expenses are approximately 2.27. And so there is small cash flow projected. The reason the cash flow has reduced is because we are now charging our overhead, and the overhead fee that we will receive from the property for the 9-month period is just under $219,000. So the net effect to the agency budget is a surplus of approximately $249,000 based on the incorporation of the property. When we amended the budget in October, the amended budget included a projected draw of approximately $1.5 million from the general fund operating reserve, and staff is recommending that the anticipated draw be decreased by the $249,000 surplus. That will reduce the draw to approximately $1.3 million and maintain a balanced budget. And it also is a small increase in the capital budget. Actually, not as small because there are a few major projects that are being completed at Forest Oak Towers, primarily the retaining wall. So the capital budget that is being included here is approximately $741,000. And I'd be happy to address any questions you may have related to the budget amendment.
Any questions on this, Jeff? Can I get a motion to recommend forward to the full commission?
So moved.
Seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
The last item that we have to discuss today, committee, is our favorite subject, tenant accounts receivable.
Thank you, commissioners. And of course, this directly correlates to our earlier discussion related to lease enforcement activity and how we are advancing that. This relates to us writing off when there are certain accounts receivables that are not that we're not able to receive, but it also highlights the fact that we are moving forward with collections. I will turn it over to our finance team to provide this update.
Thank you, President Andrews, commissioners. Again, for the record, Tim Gettinger, Senior VP of Finance and CFO. I want to introduce to you as well Siwa Prince Abujan, who is our new accounting manager, who will be taking over shortly this presentation, but help to put together this item. But for the time being, I'm going to go ahead and present this, but just wanted to put him on the hot seat and say hello.
Hi, Commissioners. Thank you.
All right, well, it looks like we have about 1 minute left for this presentation. I know that we can go a little bit over, but let me dive into it. It is HOC's policy to provide an allowance for tenant accounts receivable balance in excess of 90 days. Additionally, HOC periodically proposes write-off of uncollected former resident balances. The proposed write-off of former tenant accounts receivable balances for the first quarter of FY25 is $486,242. As with the last few quarters, lease enforcement was by far the largest driver in write-offs, accounting for 98%. A little bit of a comparable analysis. The total for FY24 was $1.38 million. FY23, $211,000. FY22, $349,000. That tells you what we're aiming for once we normalize our operations. Okay, so where we were Q1 last year, $132,000. Q2, $502,000. That obviously tells you when we were really going towards lease enforcement. Okay, Q3 was $502,000. Q4, $378,000. So you see that increase over time in terms of lease enforcement. So when we do get to the end of that, as we were talking about in the budget to actual packet, we will see those renormalized levels. The next anticipated write-off of former tenant accounts receivable balances will be for the second quarter of FY25, which will cover the period October 1st through December 31st, 2024. And the request on the table is, will the Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee joint staff's recommendation to the Commission to authorize the write-off of uncollectible tenant accounts receivable for the first quarter of FY25, totaling $486,242. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
The fact that this has always been a very heated topic for discussion, I said you brought in a new reserve player to take the heat. So at least the fact that I think there's a much better understanding now about what actions are being taken by staff to begin to address this whole area of rent collection and outstanding arrearages. And I'm hoping that we will be able to really achieve more normalization in terms of what we're looking at on future write-offs as this enforcement occurs. We know that this period of time we're going to see spikes in the amount of uncollectible rents as you gain possession of these units. And we've got a fairly significant inventory of actions that are in the courts related to gaining possession. So I think it makes it a lot more understandable for us to understand this level of write-off requirement. Yeah. Can I get a motion to recommend forward to the full commission the first quarter write-up of uncollectible of receivables as $186,242?
So moved.
Seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. So ordered. This concludes the business agenda for the committee. And so at this point in time, with no other business to come before us, we will adjourn this meeting of the Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee. And thank you all for the presentations.
Thank you.
The meeting has now ended. Thank you.